the neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, the distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I'll see you in the morning light. Light on as I drive on, singing our song. The light on as I drive on, singing our song. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between.
Welcome back, folks. What are the odds with Barnes and Baris? I'm one half of that. Rich Baris, your host, People's Pundit. Robert will join us shortly. What a day to come back. There's a lot going on. All right, first things first. If you're not on Rumble and you're watching on YouTube, we love you for it, but we'd very much appreciate it if you'd go on over to Rumble, which is in the link below, subscribe, and join, of course, the locals community, which is right above me, right here. All right, and of course, Robert's as well, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. That's in the description as well. So go ahead, subscribe to Locals. They'll let you know when we're going to go live. Hit the thing for the Locals button so you can go ahead and become a member of the peoplespundit.locals.com Locals community or the vivabarneslaw.locals.com community. Both great. Viva, I got to say, because we're going to talk a lot about this today, especially when Barnes comes on, has been doing a fantastic job covering the protests in Ottawa. And of course, the mayor of Ottawa has now declared a state of emergency. Okay, because we just can't have people protesting the government. But then there were these counter protesters, and I don't know if you guys have been watching the coverage. I see some other people, independents, of course, also doing really good work covering the truckers' protest. But Viva, he's there. He's doing his thing. And I got to say, he's doing it well, and I have been looking intently. I don't poll Canada, all right? Although I can poll basically anywhere and probably would like to get into doing so. But I am watching the polls, and it's funny that it doesn't seem to be going the pro-lockdown way anywhere. And when we polled this month for the United States, COVID now is a very distant third place when it comes to most important voting issues. When we ask people who chose COVID why they chose COVID, it is not because it is the same environment that we saw going into 2020, where you basically had seniors, even who tend to be a more Republican vote, of course, more concerned with COVID, which pulled them away from other issues that typically concern them and actually gave Democrats a little bit more of that vote, 54 and above, than they typically would get. Why am I saying this? I'm making a point here. I'm getting somewhere. All right. Now, in Canada, it's not the same dynamic, but it's funny because we have this poll I want to go over, and while we could come back to it and go over it too when Robert comes back. But this is Angus Reid, and they're a panel. They have their own panel they've built up, and they've been polling this. And here we're going to compare just earlier in January to the end of January, which they recently released. Now, Canada is much more, well, most of Canada, much more liberal than the United States. That's just kind of a fact. It's always been that way. But even in Canada, we're starting to see what we saw in the United States, which was when we asked people about COVID, only about half of them chose COVID because they believe that we're not doing enough to stop the spread of the virus, and they're still deeply concerned about it. Most of them explain COVID at this point as a moderate disease that only targets certain people, and that the politicians have lost their minds and they're just too strict with these mitigation measures. Sounds familiar. They agree with the truckers, but this is in Canada. Will this move to the United States? If the United States is even less pro-lockdown, less mitigation than Canada is. Here we go. For the first time in this Angus Reid poll, for the first time, this is what we have. And we're going to get a little bit more into age groups, why it matters. Okay. You have their poll from the 7th to 12th. And just so everybody, let's give a little bit about methodology. Okay. The poll was conducted among a representative randomized sample of 1,688 Canadian adults who are members of the Angus Reid Forum, an online panel. For comparison purposes, a probability sample of this size would carry a margin of error of plus or minus 2.5 percentage points 19 times out of 20. And what they're trying to do is basically explain the difference between a confidence interval and a traditional margin of error, which we always tell you should be referred correctly to a sampling error at this point. All right. And people in the United States are not being told that. They're different. It is different when you're talking about a randomized or not. It is still different because it is nevertheless a confidence interval as opposed, or sampling error, as opposed to a margin of error. All right. This is what the poll asked of Canadian adults. All right, if people basically agreed or disagreed with this statement. It's time to end restrictions and let people self-isolate if they're at risk. And I'm glad you can see it, because dark blue is strongly agree, lighter blue is agree, lighter red is disagree, dark red is strongly disagree, and gray is not sure or can't say. This month, the number of people who strongly agreed it's time to end the lockdowns rose from 21% to 32%. The number, or the percentage, that strongly disagreed with that statement fell from 25% to 16%. All the intensity is on the anti-COVID hysteria, anti-lockdown, anti-mitigation side. Literally double the percentage of people who strongly disagree and want the lockdowns to continue, strongly disagree and strongly agree and say it's time for them to end. Interesting. If you look, and it doesn't show you this here, but if you look by age, all right, actually start with region. I'll just read the Toronto Sun's thing on this. The majority back lifting restrictions in every province and region in Canada, with rural dwellers being more likely than urban dwellers to want restrictions lifted. No shock there, 58 to 54. The shock is that even urban dwellers now are on board with ending restrictions. Urban residents, still 54% majority, say it's time for this to stop. compared to rural being 58. Support for lifting is also the majority viewpoint for both men and women and across all but one age group. Women over the age of 54 are the only age gender group that disagree that restrictions should be ended. A majority of each of the other gender and generation groupings agree the time has come. What we call at the Public Polling Project, nesting the variables, right? We're nesting gender with age, and we're looking at different ages by different sexes, all right? Or genders. They found only women above the age of 54 still in favor of this continuing. Support for lifting restrictions is highest among men ages 35 to 54 at 67%, which, by the way, before I continue, is also why we are seeing this shift among Hispanic men. And I'm sure Robert will have a lot to say about that, because we have been talking about this for the better part of 2 years. Since this pandemic started, this was a wound that they left open to fester. And at this point, with all of the other things that politicians are doing, that political leaders are doing in the Democratic Party, they're just throwing salt in it. Just throwing salt in it. Couple this with the cancel culture and new culture wars narratives, and Hispanic men are running from Democrats like they're fleeing the plague. All right, so the second likely group is men 18 to 34 at 60%, and women age 35 to 54 at 58%. Again, women above the age of 54 are the only age group to want to continue this restriction policies, COVID policies, the restrictions, the hysteria. Among women age 55 and over, 51% disagree with lifting the restrictions, while 40% agree. Just over 1 in 5 say that they or someone in their household have been infected with COVID-19 since December 1st, with most describing symptoms as minor. Asked to rate their symptoms, which we did with adverse effects, by the way. Asked to rate their symptoms, 52% of those who tested positive said they were relatively mild. A majority. Just minor symptoms. All right, so relatively mild, just minor symptoms. That's the category. 47% said their symptoms were serious but manageable, like a case of the flu, unquote. So again, quote, serious but manageable, like a case of the flu, unquote. While 1%, uno, reported their symptoms as, quote, very severe, required hospitalization, unquote. So again, while we have all of this going on in the backdrop of everything transpiring with the truckers, everything transpiring here in the United States, this is where the public is going. And I want to back this up a little bit, because I understand when this started, a lot of people who now oppose this did support all of these mitigation. But that Johns Hopkins study last week was absolutely devastating. They updated it at the end of January, excuse me. That was absolutely devastating to people who still subscribe to it. But if you did at one point subscribe to these severe mitigation measures and you don't need more, something like that comes out, you see the public opinion moving, and it must be pretty difficult to wrestle with. And I even understand how some people in the beginning of this kind of let it get the best of them. They were overwhelmed. Misinformation flooded the zone. Speaking about misinformation, and by the way, like I said before, speaking of misinformation, Barnes and I are not playing this game. Not this season. So I'm telling you to go over and subscribe on Rumble. I'm telling you to watch on GETTR. I'm telling you to watch on the Locals TV app, which you can get on Amazon or the Play Store, the Fire Stick, which we will stream directly to there at one point very soon. I'm telling you to do it because I'm not playing this damn game this year. Everybody who was called pushers of COVID misinformation. Now, were there people who did it? Sure there were. Absolutely. There's always people who go too far. But that's not what happened here. I cite a study from the UK and I get a strike. I play a video of the UK Minister of Public Health, and I get a strike. We were right. She was right. They were wrong. And I'm just not playing this game anymore. Where we're in these 6-month increments of where people like us try to question authority, try to question the nonsense they stuff down your throat. You get in trouble for it. And then 6 months later, you're right. Is Dr. Naomi Wolf going to get her Twitter account back? Is Dr. Robert Malone going to get his Twitter account back now that the CDC 2 weekends ago quietly dumped everything he was talking about with escape, with Delta, and probably Omicron? Is he going to get it back? So I'm just not going to stop. And, we're not going to play this game. I would like to continue to be on the right side of history. I would like to continue to ask tough questions instead of swallowing nonsense. And I'm just not doing it anymore. Inside the Numbers really isn't a show about that, but this one is. And this one, we're just not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. So pushers of so-called misinformation who are now being vindicated are and it's still going on, but now it's starting to come out that from the lockdowns on down, there was just no science behind this. And we've spoken a lot about what a scientific consensus is. They can be fabricated and created. A very small group of people who dole out the money for it, and a smaller group of people who decide who gets that money. Folks, OxyContin was never safe. It was never non-addictive. And drug-seeking behavior was always the sign that somebody was a drug addict and had now been dependent and full-blown addicted to that drug. But Purdue Pharma just bought and paid for a scientific consensus. And a bunch of white lab coats and even practicing physicians trotted out there because they whored themselves and told the American people that it was safe. And an entire region of the country was decimated for it. So the minute we lose the ability to have free conversations, honest and intellectual conversations, it's over. It's over. If it wasn't for one pharmacist who the scientific community told to shut his mouth, that he was way out of bounds, I wonder how long it would have taken for Purdue Pharma to pay the price for what they did, if at all. Maybe it never would have happened. How many prescription pads were burned through so they could get cruises and vacations bought and paid for by drug companies? All at your expense. Which brings us now, by the way, to Joe Rogan. I don't know if I don't know if I would take it just to move over to another platform. I'd personally want my show, to be in a place where it is accepted and people can freely think without having to worry about being persecuted for beliefs that are later proven accurate. But Joe Rogan, okay, apparently Spotify has offered Joe Rogan a bucket load of money over 4 years to bring his podcast over from Spotify to Rumble. And I actually have this here. Although I just want to say this is reported. I mean, I could easily probably just pick up the phone and call it. Who might know? And I see he's watching. Eric may know. That's shook me as an awful lot of money. But whatever. Maybe they stand to gain from it. Of course they stand to gain from it. I just mean maybe they did the numbers, ran the numbers, and they are coming out net ahead here. But $100 million over 4 years, man, is a hell of a package. But the bottom line on this is this has been a pile on Joe Rogan for weeks now. And every loser who has been a nobody for years has essentially tried to jump on this bandwagon. Maybe they have 5 Spotify viewers and they're looking for a pat on their back from the establishment media and the confirmation crowd. And they're looking to get, maybe a spot on TV for it. Maybe they'll get a book deal on it. They'll all get lavish praise by The View and other intellectual morons. And that is benefits them. So that's what happens with these. I'm a nobody right now, but if I join the pile on, it may actually help me. So I'm going to do it. And they do. Meanwhile, is there really, even though Joe Rogan's podcast is so big, Rumble can offer him $100 million over 4 years to come over and exclusively air it there. Even though Joe Rogan is the most watched podcast in the country, even if he did let's just have a hypothetical here. Even if he did push misinformation, and he is the biggest podcast in the country, does it still equate or even come close to equating to all of the misinformation that was pushed by corporate media sponsored by Big Pharma? The constant national newspaper publications being reported on cable news, being reported on network news, ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the BBC, who apparently has nothing better to do but follow me around. Does the level of misinformation even come close to the level they pumped out? Which I spoke about on the gaggle a little bit this morning, but I'm going to hammer that. I got to bring this in. This is the kind of sleazebag tactic, scumbag tactic that we would expect from the media instead of admitting, damn, the science doesn't look like it's going our way. Maybe we jumped the gun on lockdowns. Maybe we jumped the gun on school closures. Did you guys read that John Hopkins study? Now, I know there's been a bunch of other studies, but this one's kind of serious. It's been updated. It's tracked. It's significant. It's well-sourced. None of that. You heard none of that. Instead, you got this. These kind of crappy columns, scumbag tactics from the Washington Post on Sunday. Margaret Sullivan. My former colleague, the beloved, all right, and just the @ is irrelevant. His name is Miguel Rodriguez. The beloved Miguel Rodriguez died Monday at 47. I don't know if he ever listened to Joe Rogan's podcast. I do know that. What the hell does that have to do with? I do know that with 900,000 Americans dead of COVID, the misinformation spread there is inexcusable. My column, no paywall. You're so virtuous, Margaret. You took your column. You asked the Washington Post to take your column out of the paywall because this information is just so important. I am so important. Me, Margaret Sullivan. I am so important that I can't be behind the paywall. I have to fight the good fight here. It has to be free to everybody so we can combat misinformation. What you didn't hear is that this man is one of 2 groups that really is at risk from COVID. This is a pandemic of the elderly, hands down. Anyone who has half a brain could look at a state like Florida and see it, but the numbers are everywhere else. It's also a pandemic of the unhealthy. Take a look at the image attached to this article. So am I just supposed to, and everyone is just supposed to not say how obese our friend is? The irony of somebody like Krispy Kreme pushing vaccines on people, McDonald's, people who contribute to our gross obesity problem in this country. Because that, along with age, is the worst comorbidity you could have when it comes to putting you at risk of serious disease and death from COVID-19. She has to slip Joe Rogan in there, but she makes no mention of that. She makes no mention of all of the other lies that they told us instead of talking about things that actually matter, like personal health. Take care of yourself. You'll be at little risk. Stop smoking. You'll be at little risk. Stop stuffing your faces and you'll be at little risk. Nobody pushed more COVID misinformation than corporate big media. Nobody. Sponsored by Big Pharma. Lockdowns, school closures, which robbed our children, robbed them of upwards of 2/3 of what they were supposed to learn in the year 2020. And God knows what in 2021, because they continued distance learning, because they continued the methods that they used and were able to obtain during distance learning to basically give teachers who were supposed to praise as heroes reasons to sit on their butt and not interact with students the way they did pre-COVID-19. Robbing children. My wife worked for the school system. I know it is true that some kids, if they don't go to school, they don't eat, folks. They don't eat. Robbing others of scholarships. High school students of college careers, of college students of pro careers. The damage is uncountable. Lies about risk to children. MSNBC just last week tweeted Dr. Emmanuel, kids, above, who knows? At this point, they're all the way down to like basic immunizations. To 13 years old, better get it, or else they're at risk for serious disease. That is COVID misinformation. Not to mention what we now know about escape. Robert's coming. He wants me to tell you he's coming. We're at past Delta now. The CDC just quietly dumps that on us 2 weeks ago. You know what? Natural immunity was 6 times stronger than vaccine immunity, and it's not looking so great for Omicron either. How many deaths of despair were worth that lie? The pandemic of the unvaccinated. Go look at California hospitalizations right now. Efficacy for treatments and vaccines, they lied about. Natural versus vaccine, they lied about. And on and on and on. And that John Hopkins study, if you didn't read it, and Laura, if you can, get the link on Locals that I put out and put it in the chats. Let people read it. If you did not read it, it says that the impact from these bad policies, which were first in ever, the history of human civilization, which is what caused people like myself and others to doubt it from the beginning. Show me something on the historical record. Put your hysteria and your crap propaganda away. Show me something on the historical record from when government or the powers that be, a king, some monarch, I don't care, I'll take it. A pharaoh, I don't care. Find it. Where in the historical record did they ever shut down by force commerce and lock everybody down, lock healthy people up, lock children up, stick diapers over their faces? Where is it? You won't be able to find it because it's never happened, even though we are now living in an era where medicines and treatments are far beyond anything we had ever seen in prior eras and ages of civilization. But it's never been done before. Anyone who wasn't skeptical of that should not be surprised by what they see now. And the Hopkins study stated death and damage from it is long-term and devastating, even though it had no impact on the mortality rate. None. You understand? Not little, not significant, but worth it. Nothing. Statistically insignificant either way. But what it did do was cause damage that will take us decades to compute. I'm a math guy. You better start piercing or piecing out places and industries to study one at a time, because even someone like I don't know where to start. Transportation. Curious to see whether traffic deaths were impacted by this. Abuse at home, drug use, whatever it may be. And what you'll find, like they found, is that so much of this is intertwined. There's a reason why locking someone down is a punishment in criminal statute. You put people in prison for a reason. We're social animals and we don't function correctly in isolation. We don't function correctly when we're too afraid to walk up to our neighbor and say hello. We don't function correctly when we're hiding from each other in stores, when we're stripping ourselves of the very things that make us human. Guess what happens? We start acting inhumane. Should anybody be surprised by this? Florida, North Carolina, countless other states, traffic deaths on the rise, soared in 2021, even more than 2020 when we actually had the lockdowns. Why? Pandemic-related stress that led to an increase in drug and alcohol use. And anytime there is more drug and alcohol use, there is going to be more traffic accidents. More traffic accidents means more fatalities. The number of people that died because they couldn't get cancer treatments, didn't even catch cancer, caught it too late. The number will be, by the time all is said and done, almost uncountable. So she's crying over here, and I get it. 900,000 people, that's horrible. But it will be small compared to the damage that we have done from bad policies. It will. And by the way, no mention as how, Margaret, you failed to mention how more of those came under your guy than under the guy you worked so hard to get rid of, who didn't have a vaccine, who didn't have such a broad number of treatments. There were treatments available, but you all mocked him for pushing them. Now Japan has to be the one to tell everybody. And actually, there are antiviral properties for the unmentionables. This is why I'm telling you to go on Rumble, because I'm tired of this. I don't want to censor a word. The more people know they're not drinking fish food or whatever the hell it is, fish tank cleaner, I'm lost. And I got to tune half of these idiots out. The better. All right. So with that in mind, like I said, let's run a little late. Okay, that was a little 30-minute rant. Let me get into some announcements here, okay? First and foremost, I see Laura over there. People's Pundit merch. Link is below. Accuracy matters. Little dig at you-know-who. Accuracy matters. We should get some What Are the Odds shirts too, without a doubt. And I think we can do that pretty easily, right, Laura? We can get that up. So we'll have some What Are the Odds merch, that we'll be doing. But What Are the Odds will be once a month. Robert's feeling better now, just so everybody knows, it's a seasonal thing. And then specifically, he's gotta, you gotta be what you are, right? So many of us that do this, that's not our job or career, so we're not that, or it's not our base job or career. Robert is a lawyer. I am a pollster. And especially if you are at the post 2020 point, which is what we are, which is kind of sick and tired of watching these idiots make bad decisions and just kind of calling it how we see it, right? So by that time, they've already hurt how many people? And all we get to say is, we told you so. Wouldn't it be great to say, I told you so, but I also worked my butt off to make sure those people weren't hurt? So that's the difference between pre-2020 and post-2020. After a while, it gets a little frustrating. After a while, it gets a little sad. Sad. It's sad to watch the BLS fudge a jobs report when you know, because you poll monthly, that so many people have essentially just given up since the CARES Act. It's sad when you know that it was not inevitable for 80+% of the country to tell us that they're paying ridiculously high prices for meat and poultry. Or a majority said, which we'll look at because I want to show this to Robert when it comes on. A majority said significant price increases for meat and poultry, while another more than 3 in 10 said modest increases. It's sad when you knew it wasn't inevitable for the shelves to be bare again, for inflation to be screaming again, for us to head towards rapidly stagflation. Because ultimately, those numbers are people, as people who watch the other show know damn well. Yeah. So yeah, I will ask that. That's a good question for Robert when he gets on. I like that question actually. Laura threw me that question. When Barnes gets on, can you ask him if Joe Rogan even has the option to break his contract with Spotify? Well, I guess that's something that he would, and I'll get Robert's legal take on it, which I should reply to. But yeah, that's something that he really needs to answer. But I would say this: that's an equation Joe would have to go through. Is it, or if there is some kind of a legal binding contract, and there's punitive damages that he can incur from breaking it, or monetary damages that he can incur from breaking it, is it a net positive? Did Rumble offer him a net positive? That's a good question. And I'm not sure what the terms of it is, frankly. I don't know. I really don't. But what I do know is that Spotify and others are on a suicide mission. Facebook, look at that. That's basically your future. If you want to continue to do it, knock yourself out. Twitter is becoming an echo chamber. I stay on these because it's difficult to migrate you guys over. It really is. But this year, we're going to do something huge for the election. And don't be surprised if it's exclusively on these other channels. I don't see the reason, for 2 reasons. They want to talk about being virtuous and moral for 2 reasons. I'm strongly considering just blacklisting some of these other networks to begin with. It's not that I'm trying to hurt my reach, but 1, I know the reach will be good. It's an election. That's number 1, no matter where we go. I know it will be. That's number 1. So I'm just giving them a piece of that action, allowing them to profit off of us, right? And number 2, talk about morality and virtue. They're the ones hurting people. Who is really hurting people? Is Joe Rogan really hurting people by having Dr. Robert Malone, who has more, they call him the inventor of the mRNA vaccines. He has more patents. There are other people who have done mRNA research, to be sure, but he has more patents than anybody else. You speak to anybody who is familiar with him before all of this, they will tell you he is by far a leader in that industry. Now, not only do they want to ban him, they basically want to strip him of his professional credentials. All he was doing was warning about the potential for escape with future variants. That was his main. Now, he did talk about other things, but that was his main argument. Was he or was he not correct? What does the report from the CDC 2 weeks ago, what does it say? Does it say Dr. Fauci and all of the bought and paid for white coats who whore themselves? Does it say they were right? Or does it say Dr. Malone was right? What are the conclusions they draw tell you which one was right and which one was wrong? Which side was right and which side was wrong? I mean, that's it. So why would I, Let's use their argument. Why would I and Robert and Laura and other people we choose to do this with, why would we allow them to benefit? And by the way, I kid you not when I tell you over the weekend, I got a message from Twitter. Right, Laura? I kid you not that I got a message from Twitter. There are some people who probably see it on their accounts now, but what they're essentially doing is trying to peel the appeal from locals and other places away from content creators like myself who have decent followings. They were like, you and whatever follower counts this much, and above. A couple are being chosen to test some of this stuff out. Where it's tips. You can offer premium stuff for people who just support you on Twitter. Sound familiar? I mean, it's like locals. Right, Laura? I mean, that's what it is. What they're trying to do, and they even threw a number at me, right? Yeah. They even said, listen, if you agree to do this, we're going to we're estimating that you will make this much. It's 5 figures a month. But they can kiss my you know what. Because I'm at locals and that's it. That's it. Yeah, and everything's all right. He's just running late. All right, so no concern. I know you guys were concerned about some other stuff. He's good. He's just running late. I'm not doing that because what they're seeing is competition, and they're trying and they're concerned. Listen, folks. You have them concerned. The censors, you have them concerned. They wouldn't be coming up with these ideas if they didn't realize their business model is in danger. Which brings us to GoFundMe. When we started the public polling project, we intentionally did not use GoFundMe. Rasmussen reports it started to use a public polling project, a kind of model. They allowed them to pick the states. In the end, they found out, what I essentially advised them would happen, that you can't offer that many states and a choice all at once because you just simply won't fund that many projects all at once. You just won't. I mean, not unless you have a much bigger following, and they have a decent following. But I mean, you would really need a following base of a million potentially or more, because we estimate, just to give you some inside knowledge, maybe about 2% actually will contribute. So that's what happened. But they were on GoFundMe and they were on the verge of running into an issue. So when we started the public polling project, we want to do something totally different. And I said, we're either going to find somebody who can write this program, has a plugin already that exists, and get their 100% backing that they're not going to mess with us, or we're essentially going to build it ourselves. #learn the code. So now nobody can pull down the public polling project. Can't be done. Even if some merchants or payment processors wanted to try to screw with us, it still can't be done because we have ways to get around it. So it is what it is. It's up, and we're not relying on anybody. Truckers use GoFundMe. There is an alternative out there, by the way. Truckers use GoFundMe, and GoFundMe essentially shut them down and robbed $9 million from them. They are not unbreakable, is my point. Ron DeSantis goes to Twitter and threatens to sick the attorney general on them in the state of Florida. It gets their attention. Ted Cruz and other lawmakers threaten to do something while users lose their minds, and it gets their attention. They backpedaled. They were about to take that $9 million and spread it to the left-wing causes of their choosing. It is not the first time they've done this before. It's just the first time that they reversed course. And by the way, Attorney General in Texas, Ken Paxton, also threatened to use his, the power of the office. When you do that, they buckle. They don't even have the power to resist that kind of threat that they did 6 months ago. 6 months ago, they thought, or 12 months ago, let's say, they thought they were riding high. They got rid of Parler. For YouTube, Rumble really wasn't that big of a threat or anything like that, an alternative, because Rumble really took off later. It wasn't a big threat to them. Now it's a threat. Now it's a threat, which again, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, we love you for it. The Rumble link is in the description. Go to Rumble. Subscribe. Subscribe to Viva too, is while you're at it. Check out Robert's videos. But when you get to Rumble, look right above in the corner and sign up to locals, because that is what Twitter is trying to do. They are trying to steal the locals model, the business model. They're trying to incentivize people like me and others. And they're always going to have their checkers. They're always going to have their blue check people. They're always going to have their media folks, their media personalities. But they know that's not enough. Twitter will not survive if it's an echo chamber. There's only so much money from one side to go around. Essentially, they'll just be trading the same money off to each other. The velocity, as much as it increases, won't matter. It won't matter at all, because the supply will not change. And there he is, ladies and gentlemen. I got to tell you, I'm happy to be back doing this. Here he is, Robert Barnes, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Barnes. Robert, it's good to be back, man. I just went on like a 40-minute rant, and it felt good. And I've been telling you, go to Rumble, go to locals, because I'm just not doing this anymore, Robert. That John Hopkins study clicked in my head. Like, you and I tried against many conservatives, by the way, and so-called populists, to tell people the damage from these policies is immeasurable. It has never been done before, and it will become a political liability if you supported it. And these idiots, these censors, they're not going to give anybody their Twitter accounts back, their YouTube accounts back, even though they were wrong, and they're wrong about so much else. But first of all, man, welcome back, man. This is cool. A lot of people, I got to tell you. And so, but what's your take on that? And also, whatever, you want to do your hellos.
Yeah. I think it's Rumble made it public today, their appeal to Joe Rogan. I talked to their he put it out on Twitter and put it out elsewhere. They're offering Rogan $100 million over 4 years. So they're more than doubling the pay he currently gets from Spotify. As they're offering him, Spotify gives him $10 million a year. Effectively, they're offering $25 million a year and complete freedom, so that he wouldn't have any limitations or restrictions of any kind. So Rogan can go make $25 million a year. Still, and again, Rogan keeps all his advertising dollars as well. So he keeps all his advertising dollars, gets $25 million a year for 4 years. It's not it's not as long-term contract as my understanding of Spotify's was. I think Spotify's was either 8 years or 10 years. I think it was 10 years, as I recall. So he, for 4 years, gets to go to Rumble, and gets to be on and to expand and into the that space. So helps Rumble, helps Rogan, win-win, helps free tech, helps free speech, and gets that. So I think that's a great move by Rumble, and it would be the smart move by Joe Rogan, because I think Spotify has already kind of breached their terms of their contract already by the degree of censorship they've engaged in. My understanding of that contract was that he had carte blanche on guests, and they couldn't censor it. And that's why I think they're pretending in their CEO statement, which was a pitiful, disgraceful statement. It was crime. Here you are, a CEO of a major tech company worth billions of dollars, and you issue a public statement that's this whiny, pitiful, I'm sorry, my little wokester employees. I'm so sorry you've been through so much. This is so traumatic that you've had to deal with Joe Rogan being on this platform. Maybe they should check what other musicians are on their platform. But if you want to hear some really grotesque messaging coming through, but instead, and then he says, from now on, we're going to look more and more at balancing our content distribution with user safety. So Spotify has now embraced safe spaces for streaming services. So it's just pitiful. Now, I think what's behind this is Spotify CEO had no interest in doing this, but for the pressure that's coming from Wall Street hedge funds. And that's the source of so much corruption, as identified. Like you look at the difference between the world Trump inherited as president and the world Reagan inherited as president.
Yep.
It's that the adversary was different, and the adversary was a lot more welcome now than the adversary was then.
Yeah, and so you really answered somebody's question too, which was basically, is it worth him breaching the contract even if they didn't, like, so let's just say sounds like they breached the terms of the contract anyway. But even if they didn't, is it still worth it for Rogan, in your opinion, to do this?
I think he could. I think he can negotiate with them, and they'll be fine at this point. I mean, the way they're acting, they're terrified of continuing to keep him on their platform.
Can they continue though? Can they? I guess, can they afford to lose him, Robert? I mean,
they're going to lose. They're going to lose money either way. But but with big
they
Wall
already
Street
missed
funds
their outlook too.
shorting their stock in the billions of dollars, and they're still primarily a music platform. That's their hurdle. Their hurdle is that if enough musicians walk, they start net losing money. I think, but their bigger concern isn't the musicians walking; it's the Wall Street funds who own a lot of these musicians' royalties. Older musicians, for the most part, but it's people like Blackstone, it's people like BlackRock in particular. It's some of these big entities that have been manipulating politics everywhere. People who have big interest in, I mean, both Blackstone and BlackRock is identified in Peter Schweizer's book, Red Handed.
Fantastic book.
Really well done. It's just the and for those people who didn't believe us about the scale and scope of China corruption in the United States, in not only politics but in big tech and on Wall Street. That's where I didn't know the scope of it. I knew Wall Street in general was profiting from the Chinese-U.S. relationship from the Chinese side of the equation. But I didn't realize that China had built up some of these hedge funds, that both Blackstone and BlackRock got a lot of their position that they have today in the world thanks to China. And it was like, whoa, that's a very different animal. And then when you have those same hedge funds own big shares of drug companies that are pushing the vaccines and own big shares of Neil Young. I knew Neil Young had sold out, but I didn't realize he sold out to a Wall Street hedge fund with big ties to China and drug companies. I mean, the guy he didn't care at all about the moral principles he's purportedly advocated for when he sold out his own songs to people that are completely against what he's saying about.
Right.
And that may be why, it was probably the Wall Street firm, not Neil Young, raising the concerns about the library being on Spotify.
Though, Michael K. Williams, sadly, he recently died, but he had this series on Vice, and they have a lot of new episodes, I think, still, because they taped them before he died. And they're one of them was, how basically the use of bots on Spotify, musicians can get bigger contracts, even bigger numbers from Spotify when they get offers and whatnot. And what I assume they've got to know, Robert. Here's the thing: when you're kind of wondering whether it's sound a business to trade off people like Joe Rogan and others for those entertainment companies, is that so much of that market is fake. It's fake. Like, Joe Rogan is not in there with. We talk about bot farms. They accused Trump of all these bots. They would know, ladies and gentlemen, because they are the original users of bot farms. They push them to get their music bigger, to get their TV or movie interest bigger. It's not a real market. And he laid that out incredibly well and he didn't know about it either. I mean, he was going around. It was part of his shtick, his episode. But the minute, it's kind of funny, one of the main benefactors from it, one of the main artists, he was from Baltimore, who used his money to try to prop others up and show them in the neighborhood how to do it to get out of the ghetto. The FBI, of course, went after him for doing it when everybody in the elite world does it. It's just that you couldn't give that tool to the little guy. And he did, because he was a computer whiz. He wasn't really a good rapper, and he's not a good rapper, but he was a computer whiz. And he's doing a 2-year bid right now, Robert, and forced to pay back, I think it was, Laura probably remember, like $4 million they want back because of this. And they'll say it's because he like poached ticket sales, which there's explicitly a law against. You can use bots to do so much, many other things. But one thing you can't is ticket sales, to resell tickets. So get a scraper or a bot to come in and take all those tickets and then resell them, even though it's the employer who told him to do it, the company who told him to do it. And he made them like a couple million. He made $250,000 to put it in his pocket. The company got in no trouble. So it really goes to show you what they care about. And my point is, I guess, little guy gets always prosecuted while the big guy gets away. That always happens. But my point is, he really showed how much of this is really fake and just generated to give them a bigger bottom line later. It's not real. So, I mean, Joe Rogan's fan base is real, Robert,
Yeah.
and they're kind of sacrificing that for what? Mary Trump, the idiot, and, and a bunch of musicians who aren't good enough to get real streams. So they pay for them.
Well, and that's why I don't think that is their real motivation. Their real motivation is who it is that owns those licensure legacies, and that their stock was being shorted aggressively on Wall Street. It's Wall Street funds. This is just big drug companies disguised as musicians, as sincerely concerned musicians, and Barack Obama was going to take his stuff off of Spotify and so forth. And there's been an internal revolt the whole time. Spotify's high-ranking employees are all a bunch of lefties. This was the GoFundMe issue. I mean, the GoFundMe risk. Now it's good to see attorney generals finally get off their rear ends and do something about this kind of stuff. But it's a good sign of what's happening, that it starts with a court of public opinion, hops up to some lawyers, hops up to some Senate candidates, people like Blake Masters and J.D. Vance, and then hops up to actual attorney generals in 5 different states. West Virginia, I had not seen the attorney general from West Virginia get proactive on much of anything, and all of a sudden they're proactive. And Florida and Texas have been pretty good for the last couple of years, but it was good that they're stayed proactive and yet leverage their power to start opening up criminal investigations. And this is not the first one on the Texas or Florida side. They've opened up criminal investigations into Google and Facebook for all their other activities over the last several years. But to announce so aggressively that they would use their state power to punish GoFundMe for trying to do what they were doing to the truckers is a very positive sign that Republicans slowly but surely are starting to get it. The next step attorney generals need to take is to go after these big employers, because you don't have to wait on the EEOC if you're an attorney general because almost every state has an analog agency and analog power. Obviously, the Biden Justice Department is not going to go after people denying religious accommodations for vaccine mandates. They're not going to do it. Now, the Obama administration did it. And obviously the Trump administration did it in an earlier context when they tried to force nurses to get flu shots. They stepped in and sued in court through the EEOC, but the Biden administration is clearly not going to do it, even if the everyday EEOC officer would like them to do it. But that doesn't have to be the end of the story. The reason why states have not been proactive in this space is because the EEOC has almost always preempted them, as led. The EEOC now is not going to lead. So state attorney generals in Texas and Florida, all across the country, should be looking at representing people against these private employers and bringing injunction actions and bringing declaratory relief actions and bringing damages cases as appropriate against these employers like Tyson Foods and others like Carhartt, who are systematically denying people their religious accommodations. And if they were smart, they would be taking the lead. I'm trying to help, facilitate that. But it would be nice if they took the lead in that space too. And it would be the right legal decision, the right moral decision, but also the right political decision for them to do so.
Right, and that's ultimately what we were trying to argue 2 freaking years ago, that this will turn. And if you end up, I just don't see the point the early advocates, on the right of like going along with this, because in the end, all you're doing is assigning yourself either equal or at least partial culpability to these policies that will
Yep.
inevitably be unpopular. So, well, we could lose in 2020. Look, you let them change the election. you could lose anyway. It was always my argument to them. You really just kind of fell asleep at the wheel. So, I mean, don't cry about it now. You better just start looking toward the future. And by the way, being on the right side of history, morally, like you said, and politically, both, because this was always going to end up here. If you could have showed me another example in the historical record of when, we reacted like this, then I may have had a different opinion. But so far, up until that point, it just wasn't there, Robert. It was not there. So this was an inevitable result. And the AGs, that's something they should have learned from Democrats, no? I mean, that is what they did under Donald Trump, from immigration to immigration status being asked on the census. They basically joined with these other groups and people and took the lead. They didn't wait for someone in the federal government to help them out. I mean, this is crazy.
Exactly. I mean, they should have been on top of this from the very inception. They were mostly slow to act. And consequently, we kind of got behind the 8 ball in ways we didn't need to get behind the 8 ball. And I've told people, watch people, we'll be assessing and identifying who's a legitimate, authentic populist candidate throughout over the next several months. And we'll have different candidates that can point people towards, because I know a lot of people have asked for that. To try to figure out who's who.
A lot of people.
What's what. And it's obvious we can't rely on a certain man down in Mar-a-Lago to make those decisions. God bless his soul. Like in Nashville, how do you go about and say, okay, somebody told me to pick this, and he picked the one candidate running in that congressional district who is the most anti-Trump candidate. I get she weaseled her way into working for him, because that happened all the time, and that's Mike Pompeo for you.
That's
Mike
Pompeo.
Knew how to manipulate Trump. He's anti-Trump at core on a lot of big issues. Not all, but a lot of big issues. He's the reason why Trump has the Assange problem, in part, was Pompeo. Pompeo and Pence were the ones that coordinated that with a certain prominent person out in California, but we'll get to that some other day. But the dynamic of that is, I mean, the one can't, I mean, there's legitimate populist candidates running in Nashville, known to people like Sebastian Gorka and others as a good, solid populist candidate. And here's what I'll give the Tennessee Republicans have stepped up twice now. The first time they stepped up by passing a law that prohibited discrimination in any form based on vaccine mandates, and that you have an absolute right to say no to a vaccine mandate, period. Just imagine it's Harvey Weinstein. You do have a right to say no in Tennessee. And now that law, I mean, I've dealt with several big employers. Now, one exception, Tyson Foods. They think they're above the law, period. But the other major employers are walking back their vaccine mandate because they don't want to contest or challenge that the Tennessee law. In fact, there's companies that are not imposing it in Tennessee and are imposing it in other states. So you get that kind of dynamic. But the second thing that Tennessee legislators did very well is when they finally aggressively used their redistricting capabilities. The Supreme Court has made clear it wants to stay out of redistricting. Yeah. That's not going to stop a bunch of liberal courts like there in North Carolina from staying excessively active at intervening at trying to dictate Democratic maps. Might happen again in Pennsylvania. New York drafted one of the craziest. Carolina. I mean, New York just went through and got rid of half of the Republican congressmen in the state. But credit to Tennessee, it's like, okay, if they're going to play it that way, Republican states got to return the favor. In places like Florida, in places like Texas, where there's been a lot of seats, and especially the way the Mexican-American vote is trending and the Cuban vote is trending, you could really design some districts that disproportionately favor Republicans.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
In Tennessee, you naturally have two Democratic districts, Nashville and Memphis.
Right.
And it's pretty tough to divvy up Memphis. So leave Memphis as a Democratic district. But they did a nice job how they divvied up Nashville. They just split it right in three. Boom, boom, boom. And then stuck a bunch of
They did that with Albuquerque. Portland. I mean, it's Robert. It's insane. Like, I have to say this. This emphasis on population is very dishonest, because that is not the only standard when you're considering redistricting. It is simply not. Now, I don't know if you saw our good friend Sean Trendy over in Virginia. That is what he did in order to look. This is another reason why the main reason why population is a bogus issue. Forget about the law stating other factors. The reason why population is bogus to me is because we don't count immigration status. We don't ask about immigration
We don't
status.
exclude that. In other words,
yes,
you get to have a bigger Democratic district solely by having a bunch of illegals stacked in that district.
that's exactly right, and that's what they did with Northern Virginia, to be able to curve it on down just north of the Shenandoah Valley instead of giving Shenandoah their own district. And we're going to see them try to do something very similar in Florida, which is why Ron DeSantis released the map he did, which is like, look, this is your starting point. This is, I mean, there is no reason to give up anything more than this. And we'll see how it goes. But North Carolina, for instance, this is something that should really bother people in North Carolina, because Roy Cooper had rolled the dice. He was trying to get Medicaid expanded in the state. The budget was a year late. It was just ridiculous dereliction of duty. The Senate leader on his side was, and it's a Republican majority, but they had their own, minority leader. It was on his side for almost the entire time until finally, the generic ballot just got so bad. The polling in the North Carolina courts showed they're probably going to lose 2 seats in the Supreme Court, and it's just going to be a bloodbath. And basically, they conceded to that map, because when Republicans came to them and said, this is what you backed yourself in the corner, we didn't do this, you did. You overstepped, and now you're going to pay for it. And the Senate leader went to Roy Cooper and said, you did do this, so now I'm out. And he said, I'm going to vote with Republicans, and I'm taking my votes with me. And because he tried, he said, look, we rolled the dice, we lost. You got to deal with it. Roy Cooper his back was against the wall, and he said, all right. And they agreed, not only we're not expanding Medicaid, they agreed to a bunch of other provisions with certain things with schools that were a fight, teacher raises and all this other stuff, and then redistricting. And Republicans did it as a thumb in the eye. Like, look, this is what you get. First of all, he lied. He said he would not postpone the budget to try to get Medicaid expansion, and because this is the second time he did it, and he did. So they caved to this map. And then what do? They run to what they know is a left-leaning Supreme Court that's time is up. Its time is up. And they used justices they know are going to lose to do this, Robert. And at least, like I said, at least that was a process that was through the legislature. I don't like courts getting involved, Robert, at all. And I don't like these commissions. I don't care if it's Sean, or I don't care if it's, the California Commission.
Never work out for the ordinary person or populace.
No.
Every commission is always elite run, elite driven, elite ideas, elite interests. Doesn't matter where it is or when it is or what it is. Name a commission that's produced a populist result. Throughout the history of congressional commissions, federal commissions, state commissions, I know of none. None of those commissions ever. Yeah. They're like that guy from the movie The Brother, Where Art Thou? What's the name? You know what I'm talking
Brother,
about?
Where Art Thou? Yeah. Brother, Where Art Thou? Yeah, George.
Yeah,
Clooney,
okay.
Right?
Remember the reformer candidate in there who's also secretly a head of the Klan. Who's like the goes around with a broom with the midget and all that stuff, and then he gets run out on a rail because he's a fraud and useless at the end. That's the history of Southern reformer politics and reformer politics in general. It's the mistaken misapprehension, as we've discussed, of the progressive era. The progressive era was the beginning of the professional class seizing power in America from working class organizations predominantly. Sometimes old, corrupt, oligarchic organizations, but often those political machines were working class driven organizations. It was how you got a job. You made sure your guy won so you could get hired. And mostly those were working class people getting hired. That's why our turnout was better in the late 19th century in the North than it, I think, ever has been since. I mean, we had some
Yeah.
of our highest turnout in the 1880s, 1890s in northern urban areas. It was because your
One
actual
man, one
job
vote.
depended upon it. Your own benefits
Yep.
depended upon it. It was like the
Yep.
utility of a political machine was you weren't going to get any government services unless your side won. What did that make it? That made it democratically accountable at a certain level in ways that now our civil service bureaucracy has no democratic accountability. And so commissions are just an extension of professional class expertise. It's always, we need some experts
Yup,
on
the
this.
experts.
Exactly. That leads to these debacles and disasters in redistricting. So I've been trying to track as much as I can what's happening with redistricting. The Supreme Court has made clear that the courts should not be as involved as they have been, but you can tell some liberal courts are just ignoring that.
They don't give a damn. That's what just happened in North Carolina. They didn't give a damn. That is what the Republican side argued, the legislature side argued. They were like, look, we've been through this in North Carolina. This is what we were instructed to do. This was a fair, it was a fair process. It was the most transparent process that has ever happened in North Carolina. I will say that flat out. And again, both sides agreed to it. It was part of a deal. And for a court to come in and undo that is outrageous. And the panels, the commissions are worse. I witnessed firsthand what happened out in California, which is why some of my little left-wing guru fake data guru friends over there are just lying to people on social media. California is a perfect example. They had a ridiculous number of iterations that they had drawn. They were way past the deadline. They were totally derelict because every time they came up with it, another special interest group came in and wanted to hammer it. They got another call. The experts got another call from a political leader and got hammered over it. So in the end, they scrapped a map. They came out with a map and approved a map, really rammed it through, that didn't look like any of the prior iterations. They threw the public for a total loop. And the only thing they had in common, all of the iterations had in common, was get rid of Devin Nunes. Write Devin Nunes out. And that's all they had in common. This last one doesn't look like the prior because I know it because I saw it firsthand. They simply opened the door to an LGBT radical left-wing group and said, you write the map. And that's what happened. And then they approved it and ran through, bro.
Is that why Devin Nunes is like, I'm done with California politics and now working
absolutely. You should have. I mean, there was a candidate.
And the irony is just because he exposed Russiagate, because he's actually been an anti-Russia guy his whole political life. It's not like he has any sympathies whatsoever with that side of the political aisle. He just saw Russiagate for what it was. It's like, this has nothing to do with Russia. This is a fraud.
And they wanted it's a group called New Way California. And it was actually started by Schwarzenegger. Even John Kasich is involved in this group. And it's Yep. And you guys would be shocked on how many local Republican leaders are trying to screw over a guy out there named David Giglio. He's running in the new 13th, which they realized too late, actually voted yes in the recall by margins traditional Republican counties did not. And there's two Democratic candidates in the race. You have the left winger who ran against Nunes, which the establishment didn't like, but got really damn close to Nunes because he raised a ton of money. And then you have this guy, Adam Gray, who's a state assemblyman that they're trying to push off as a moderate, like Jim Costa 2.0. Jim Costa is literally running around all the farmers out there saying, this is my guy. It's unwinnable for Republicans. It's not. I polled it. It's dead even. And it is because of Hispanic men. Trump lost this district 54-44. When we polled it, our breakdown was just like a little bit more pro-Biden when we looked vote history and asked who you voted for. Yet Trump carries this district now because Hispanic men were like, we have learned our lessons, and they are voting for Donald Trump. They're getting closer in the Republicans for Republicans on the generic ballot, but they don't trust the Republican Party, and with good reason, because the Republican Party is out there, many locals who are horse trading. This one guy said, I'll endorse you if you give me your assembly seat. So he endorsed Adam Gray. He's supposed to be this pro-life Tea Party conservative. These people are the biggest backstabbing scumbags I have not ever run into, but they're up there. All right. And they wrote this district And this is a once in a generation opportunity for Republicans to take an open new district in California because the coalitions are changing. It will be hard to defend in 2024, but I think in the end, if Republicans handle this right, by that I mean, do not, like, one guy can't stand David Giglio, so he literally went out and got this guy Diego Martinez to declare as a Republican, not because he thinks he can win. He did it because he endorsed Adam Gray, and the Republican candidate David Giglio found out about it and called him out on it. And he's like, "I'll destroy you," went into this thing. And so this guy Diego Martinez, bro, he placed 31st in the gubernatorial recall, 31st with 10,000 votes statewide, 0.01% of the vote. And they know that in this, especially in this cycle, you cannot have two Democrats on the ballot, a moderate and a lefty, and then one Republican, because the Republican's going to sneak right by and carry it. And he will.
Because
David Giglio will win that race.
For those that don't remember or don't know, that's because California has an open primary system.
That's right. You should mention that to people. That's right. And in this, absolutely. And in this cycle, that sample in that poll was D plus 10, Robert, because it still is. It was like that old district that was in contest was 16. But it's now 13. It's now California 13,
like
and
the Reagan
more
Democrats.
Republican.
It's like the Reagan Democrats were those old ethnic former descendants of immigrants, not immigrants themselves, but descendants of immigrants that overwhelmingly voted for Reagan. And depending on where they are, they might have still voted Democrat at the congressional level and the state level and all the rest.
Right.
That didn't change until later. Really, 94 started the switch there for some of those some of those constituencies, but not all, because Trump won a lot of them that had gone to Obama. But what you're seeing is Mexican American men following that. It is
Mexican American. Yes, it is. You know what? While you're doing this, while we're
by the way,
about this, I'll pull this up, man. While we're chatting.
Go ahead.
I
was saying, this information was buried in the old Pew data from 2016.
It was.
If you dug in, you saw second, third, fourth generation Mexican. The more distant you were from immigration ancestrally, the more you liked Trump and were open to the possibility of Trump. And Trump just converted them over 4 years from 2016 to 2020. I mean, I saw this because I have nieces and nephews whose father is Mexican, and they were all deeply anti-Trump in 2016. Now, they're young, 12 to 15. But once 2020, a bunch of them were voting for Trump and like Trump. And I was like, wow, what a conversion from where they were 4 years before. And they were closer to immigrant parents, and that their father was Mexican. But that it was just throughout that entire community. And the other thing is, it was showing up in the Puerto Rican community, showing up in other immigrant communities, showing up in obviously the Venezuelan and Cuban communities. But it was showing up in a wide range of immigrant community. Like, the more you had an immigrant population, the more it trended towards Trump in a whole bunch of places throughout the entire country. But the Mexican American movement in California and Texas was one of the most significant movements. That's why I think, as I recall, California ended up trending maybe by a point or so. Well, wasn't it more Trump in 2020 than it wasn't the margin closer to Trump in 2020? Yeah,
and it was from this area of the state. This is what people didn't understand.
It is a Central Valley, right?
Yes, it's the Central Valley. When the recall was going on, and people didn't understand that Republicans blew like $14 million in Orange and San Diego County, when that is not where the movement was. And we were like shouting, like, hello, the Mexican men are going to vote like white men. Do you understand? Nobody believed it. They didn't believe it, Robert. That's the truth. And that's what happened. And just so everyone understands, like, if I show them this real quick, let me add this to the screen, and then you put you and me to the side. Here's the 2020 vote preference. It's 54 Biden, 40 Trump. So in other words, it was actually a little bit more Biden than it really was. My sample is more Biden than it really was. Trump actually got 44% of this vote. Yet if you look at the 2024 vote preference now, Trump leads Biden by 3 points. And where is this coming from? Let me look at Hispanic detail. Here is Mexican men. Look at Mexican men, dude. 45, 43 Trump. And the difference between Trump winning in the generic ballot, and I know it's, I'll make it bigger. The difference between Trump winning on the hypothetical matchup and Republicans trending slightly in the generic ballot is that Mexican men. See, Democrats, it's like the numbers flipped 45, 43, because there is this group of working Mexican men. They like Donald Trump. They don't trust Republicans.
Right.
They just don't trust them. And they like Trump because they feel like politicians have let them down. This water storage issue, this water shortage issue that they have out in the valley, that's their lifeblood. And Democrats have just, and Democrats have, and that between that and cost of living, they just can't do it anymore. And they're like, you know what? At least under Donald Trump, I ate. And if someone's going to get it done, it's going to be someone who's not in this clique of people, which is why, by the way, them trying to put an establishment Republican in the race to siphon votes away from Giglio is stupid, because Giglio has Hispanic outreach. He's been shaking hands for a year, and he is not a politician. He's an educator, a public educator, and now a small business owner who, when they talk about crime, he's been robbed twice. So when they talk about crime, he's got this story. They're stupid, man.
But I think of public educators in a Mexican American school. I just now always think of Cartman. How do I reach these kids?
And you know what? He was like anti-CRT, wound up getting out of it, had these problems over CRT. Like, look, I don't feel comfortable teaching minority children or any children, that you're disadvantaged based on the color of your skin, because we're putting it in their minds that they're less than white children. That's racist. I'm not down with this.
Yeah, and the working, I mean, that's why the whole Latinx has never been popular within working class Mexican American culture. The culture, it's cowboy culture. I learned that actually at Yale, of all places. A buddy of mine was from South Chicago, Mexican American, and he loved cowboy hats. When he wanted to go out and celebrate the Mexican Revolution. I think it's like May. There's one in May and there's one in September. There are various revolution celebration days. He wanted to go get a gun and shoot it up in the air outside of Yale. That kind of thing. And I was like, that's what's deeply popular within the culture. It's cowboy culture. It's a very populist culture. It is not
masculine,
a woke culture ever.
Yeah. Speaking of, when it came to critical race theory, looking at Hispanic detail, again, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Central Valley. So if you're a Republican donor who constantly gives to the typical Republican candidates that the RNC and the NRCC tell you to give to, I'm telling you, you want a sleeper, this is it. All right. Colombians, it's a very small sample, but 100% against CRT. Cubans, 90+% against CRT. Dominicans, 63 to 37. Mexicans, 60 to 26. Nicaraguans, 59 to 41. Other Hispanic, other groups, 44 to 32. Peruvians were the only group that were in favor of it, man, aside from Salvadorians, which is like, MS-13. I'm sorry, I had to say it. But, the vast majority of Hispanics, 61 to 26 against. So they just don't like this guy. They're like, wokeism, fix my water. Like, I'm dying over here. Like, they don't care about any of this.
Well, this is, El Jefe, Caudillo. It's a populist culture, deeply populist culture. Particularly the closer they are to Mexican American culture, which is really strong in places like the Central Valley. Again, they're all there because they came up to work in the fields and farm, going back to Cesar Chavez's days, and in West Texas. And it's if you're ever in that neighborhood, I got almond farmers that are in the Central Valley. If you're ever around that area, it's a populist, blue collar, cowboy, the equivalent of American country music. It's just Mexican country music kind of culture. A lot of machismo. It just reminded me of just it's rednecks who are brown and came from a different place. I mean, it's that kind of culture.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah, and you have to be careful. I mean, just because tend to be a little shorter, tend to be around Viva's size. That don't take that for, because they're some. How did Trump put it? Some bad hombres.
Bad hombres, man, for sure. And yeah, and the district is close because whites are going by like 7 points for the Republican, and it's almost basically even among Hispanics. It's a majority Hispanic. It's only like whites are only like a third of the electorate.
It was
Hispanics are 50 something.
Democrats' biggest misread, which was to assume that if they were pro-immigrant, that all the sons and grandsons and great-grandsons would be voting Democrat forever. That our American history has proven that is not what happens. They should have paid attention. And then the second part was assuming that they're brown, so they'll vote Democrat forever. And if they paid attention, I mean, that was originally part of the pitch to Catholic immigrants in the 1920s and 1930s that helped build the Democratic political machine. How did that work out by 1968? And a lot of them are voting for, you had Poles in South Milwaukee voting for George Wallace for president. So they misread they misread that dynamic fundamentally. And to his credit, Trendy has been pointing this out all along in this aspect. Trendy has said that everybody who assumes immigration predicts a Democratic future long term should study the history of immigrant voting patterns in America, because historically their sons and grandsons and great grandsons vote their values, don't vote their immigrant ancestors' political interest.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. He does deserve credit for that, especially after he's been a little bit too more vocal since Youngkin. His performance was incredible with it, but he wasn't the first. This has been happening. It started under Donald Trump. This is and you can actually see it here. The only reason why Trump and Biden are lower than the generic ballot is because there are more someone else's. But the fact is, Trump's lead among whites is 20 points, where the Republicans is only 7. Trump leads among Hispanics by 3, while the Republicans are down by 3 among Hispanics. So even if these people said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and get off the third party wagon, they would lean more to Trump now because Biden's approval with them is so bad. And Biden
what this is a testament to is this isn't to Trump the person. This is to Trump a populist version of republicanism.
That's right. Right. And that's, man, that's a very fair point. And it's also now he had like a record, and you haven't been hearing a lot from social media from him. The media doesn't have that to pound him with constantly. So when we poll people, they're basically like, this is what it was like under Trump. Like they like forgot about a lot of the other crap, or at least to them, it doesn't matter. And this is a district Joe Biden won with 54% of the vote. He won it by 10 points. Of course, this district didn't exist back then, so I had to, this. I'm giving you the calculations here that you take a shape file, you put it over, and that's it's actually simple. I just don't want to like drag people down, too far under, but there is a way to fairly easily calculate the presidential vote share in this new district. And anyway, I mean, Biden is now in the, he basically lost like Virginia, 10, 12 points support. So if you have that going into a midterm.
In New Jersey,
yeah,
too,
man,
right?
it's like a 2 to 5 point win in this district right now, which is going to be a stunner. Yeah, he lost like 16 points in New Jersey. So it could actually be more pronounced.
I mean, that guy had, and I mean, didn't that Republican candidate have like no money in New Jersey?
No money.
That just showed how much this was an anti-Biden, anti-Democratic Party reaction, that New Jersey trended even more Republican than Virginia did.
The Republican Governors Association ignored Jack Ciattarelli. They ignored him. And his own polling, he had, what's his name doing his polling? The one, Fabrizio. He had Tony Fabrizio doing it. So, I mean, there was no reason for them not to believe Fabrizio. And Fabrizio started polling that race, and it was like Murphy plus 16, plus 17. And then by a month out, it was Murphy by 3. And all they had to do was give Ciattarelli a little push over, and he would have made it. But he did it the Jersey way. He got that close, the Jersey way, which is literally, folks from the area, you'll know, up and down Route 9, shaking hands at diners. up and
Wow.
down Route 9 shaking hands at diners. But Chris Christie did that too against Corzine, but he had help. The Republicans back then in 09 believed Christie was going to beat Corzine if they gave him a little push. And they did. And they pushed him over by a few points. Christie only won by like 2.4, something like that. But that was what Jack Ciattarelli that would have been the result if they believed the nonsense, Robert, which drives me nuts. They believe the lies. I got to tell you, I've met with a lot of people they were stunned at the polling we did here. I met with a lot of Republicans in California. There's like something unique there, which is they're defeatists. I mean, cowardly is the word. I mean, I don't mean to insult you guys if you're listening, but it's just the damn truth. You have no cojones because you're so used to getting beat, you don't recognize an opportunity anymore. And that's sad for you because Democrats, your opponents, they'll go after Devin Nunes. They don't give a damn if the district's R plus anything. They see, R plus 23 Nunes' district was. Yet they saw an opportunity and they said it's a bad year for Republicans. We have a lot of ammunition against Devin Nunes. We can take him out. And by the way, that group, that's why nobody protested when Devin Nunes was written out, because they hated this group, New Way California, and all their allies. They hate Donald Trump, and they want, and this is a quote, to purge the state of Trumpism. They believe that Donald Trump is the reason why they do so bad in California. I mean, the stupidity is just unfathomable.
I mean, the Democratic establishment side continues to radicalize other members in California and elsewhere with things like, trying to get rid of religious accommodations. How is that going to play over in Mexican-American part of California? To say that, that is not, they're going so full San Francisco that they will create opportunities at the state legislative level and the congressional level in 2022, because they're radicalizing people who weren't radical beforehand. We probably haven't poll tested it yet, because who would think to poll test it? But my guess is you're going to find 80% plus support for religious accommodations and protection of religious rights against vaccine mandates for children. I can't imagine that's anything less than an overwhelmingly people support that. If your child medically can't take it, shouldn't have to take it. If your family believes that it violates their religious beliefs, that you shouldn't be forced to take it, particularly the COVID vaccine. This isn't polio in 1960.
Right.
This is COVID. My guess is that, we've already seen Monmouth and others finally caught up to what your polling showed a year ago, which is if you ask the question the right way, vaccine mandates were not and would not be popular. But now even Monmouth and others are like, oh, yeah, it turns out vaccine mandates are unpopular after all. That's because you asked the question honest way, you could figure that out.
Yeah, and because you have to give them the consequence of that too. And we didn't ask about exemptions, which you're probably right about that. That's a really good idea, because we have a whole section on COVID. We always, with the Public Polling Project, we always do. By the way, the link's in the bottom if you guys want to donate to it. Go ahead and contribute to it. We've got some incredible information that came out in this last one, Robert, with food shortages and just stunning stuff. And by the way, severe adverse events, go and look at the trend. 6 months now. There's obviously something with age. All right. Do you know what the odds are of us finding that pattern for 6 months?
Consistently. I was debating someone on our my locals board, the vivabarneslaw.locals.com board, that they were saying, hey, no, the military should be required to take this, and it's wrong. And what was fascinating was the assumptions that this commenter or questioner or critic had. And his first big assumption was that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act shouldn't be the law, because that's really what they're objecting to. They're objecting to the courts being involved in the military. And it was like, it's very simple. We passed a law that made it so that the military can't discriminate based on religion. Do you really disagree with the law if you don't like the courts involved? Because that's how we chose to do it. But independent of that is that the reason why they can't meet the standard, or the military cannot meet the standard of the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, is because it requires the military prove that being unvaccinated from COVID-19 makes soldiers much less prepared and ready to fight than if they were vaccinated, and that there's no other alternative to vaccination to suffice to make sure soldiers are ready and prepared. And the problem was that big assumption, because it's like, for that age group, young, healthy by definition if you're in the military. The risk from COVID is minuscule, but the risk from the vaccine, based on your polling data and other information, is real. That the reality, the reason why the military can't win an actual court challenge on the evidence is because the members of the military get to, the soldiers, the airmen, the sailors, the Marines, get to present their side of the story evidentiary wise, and their part of the story would show, here's my risk from COVID-19 and not being prepared to go to battle, versus here's my risk from the vaccine. And that's where the vaccine adverse events data that you are documenting is critical in that respect.
And here it is, just so people can see by age. I mean, this is like, again, guys, I mean, what we have repeatedly found is that we give you mild adverse effects that did not interfere with activity, moderate adverse effects that interfere with activity, and severe adverse effects that prevented daily activity. That is the way the CDC, because a lot of people are like, why did you word it like that? The fact is, that's the way the CDC words it. A headache could be mild to somebody and it could be severe to somebody else. So it's not a specific condition. It's how it impacts your daily activity. And 65 plus is always the less likely group to report an adverse effect. And as you go down in age, you will see it continuously rise. And this month,
look at that. I mean, that's the military age group, that youngest age group, disproportionately. You have some in the 30 to 44. But when you're talking about active soldiers who they claim they're worried about active sailors, active Marines, active Navy SEALs, so on and so forth, and active airmen.
right.
They're going to be disproportionately in that 18 to 30 group. And that's the group that 7% are reporting disabling, because that's really what that describes. Severe adverse events that prevent daily activity at a normal level. That's disabling. It's 7% reporting disabling. By contrast, the number of military, any member of the military that has died or suffered severe harm from COVID, because remember, they track this in great detail, is minuscule. I mean, it's less than 1%, way less than 1%. So you're at 7 times risk of being unprepared for battle because from the injuries suffered from the vaccine than you are from the virus.
Dude, we asked the Department of the Navy about a report that we saw last week, which was from a source we just never saw, so I didn't want to trust it. Didn't get a response. I would have assumed they would have immediately rebuked this if it was false, but the report basically said another pilot fell out of the sky. Basically had a reaction mid-flight and just fell out of the sky, dude. He's dead. And they would have shut that down.
Senator, I was going to say, to your what you're discussing, I mean, what Senator Johnson is requesting is what that Defense Department leaked data showed was almost tenfold increases in a range of disabling medical conditions reported post-vaccine in the military.
And we also show
a bunch of them. It's like 4 or 5 different neurological issues, heart issues, all off the charts, unprecedented rise of it post-vaccine. And we all
females too, Robert. Females too. That's another thing. Yeah, every damn time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little worse for young men in some contexts. For like myocarditis, for example, appears to be
that's true. That's true.
But neurological effects, menstrual effects, also off the charts, and disproportionately young women. I mean, in some cases by definition, but they still haven't explained it. And again, and also what I've been saying to some of these people say, yay, the mandate's just fine for the members of the military. And I get the legal concept. The legal concept is the government has a lot more right of control over members of the military than the rest of us. Number one. Number two, they're allowed to be concerned for the member of the military in ways they're not legally allowed to be concerned for you as a citizen. As even Alan Dershowitz acknowledged in my debate with him last year, you cannot impose a mandate to benefit someone's own health. That's someone's own choice. But you could in the context of the military because you need them prepared for battle. So I get legally they have the most generous power in the context of the military. The problem is, and the reason why they don't want to go to an evidentiary hearing or trial on this, on the religious accommodation or medical accommodation issues, and they're systematically denying both, is that is this data. They know that a deep dive into the data is probably going to show their own data is that because they keep detailed records of what causes problems for members of the military.
How could they not?
That almost nobody has died or been disabled from COVID, but that there have been more deaths and disabilities in less than a year post-vaccine.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too, because we're getting close. I don't know how long you could stay, but there's a lot of people. I'm kind of like fighting every month the DeSantis clicks that say, because I'm showing the 2024 hypothetical matchup right now. And just so people understand, they're like, why aren't you adding DeSantis? Come on, why are you only doing Trump?
Oh.
This is a little lower this month than it was last month. Last month was 46-40 Biden. They both kind of came down a little bit. And I'm going to show you why I think that is. This was the distribution and the participation of the poll. And I think this is why we saw them both come down somewhat. Biden is doing substantially worse in liberal areas than we would expect him to do. And we just did not. The reality is the working class was well represented in the numbers, but not the region, which we have told you can make a big difference numerous times. But that's the regional participation. But Robert, look at whites with no college degree. 61-22 Donald Trump. I don't think it's even possible, and I'll get into DeSantis in a little bit. I don't think it's possible for a Democratic candidate to win the Electoral College if you're getting trounced like that among white working class. Because the Electoral College, it means Ohio and Iowa are like 15 points. It means I'm trying to be with a straight face here, but I kid you not, this is the biggest blowout. Like the night is over early. You'll have MSNBC crying about how we have to wait for absentee ballots, but like Pennsylvania's call by the decision desk, it's over. Like there's not enough absentee ballots to overtake the lead if Biden wins them 80-20. Like that it would be like that.
Exactly. And then you add the fact that the laws have changed or are changing in
That's
Pennsylvania,
right.
Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. They're not going to have the magic ballots be able to.
Wisconsin too, right? Yeah, you said Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin. It's just it'll go up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, but they'll ultimately find what the trial court found, which is that drop boxes are illegal, and that people have to personally cast their ballots. That no third-party ballot harvester can be there. That's where Dinesh. I've only heard about it. I haven't seen the preview or seen the movie. Dinesh D'Souza's movie, which is following what we were highlighting all the way back at election time, which was the big problem was how ballots got counted and how ballots got cast and how ballots showed up at the ballot office. Part of the best legal way to challenge that was through signature matches, but functionally how it occurred was the existence of all these drop boxes that were unsupervised and unsurveilled. A lot of them funded by Mark Zuckerberg's Meta or whatever lame name he's got for it currently, but funded by Zuckerberg through, charities. And the net effect of it was that's how there was this flood of ballots that came in. And one way to check it is meaningful signature match checks is the most effective legal way. But the best legislative reform is just get rid of ballot harvesting, period. Get rid of drop boxes, period. Require people to personally deliver their ballot to the mailman or to the election office. And that would get rid of 70% of what happened. Won't get rid of all of it, but it'll get rid of a portion of it without a doubt. And that would have and could have and should have happened, but now is going to happen. But a lot of apparently what D'Souza is going to document is all the video footage and other footage and testimony about everything that went AWOL in the Dropbox context. I think he's calling it in the ballot harvesting context, which Dropbox is heavily facilitated. Exactly.
That's what we were trying to explain to people in the 2 months you and I were doing this leading up to the election, is that the drop boxes were the end round specifically for them in states where there were already existing bans on ballot harvesting. So where they weren't allowed to do it, that's where they got the idea from them. And if they could sneak them in any other place, they would, because it could only help them. But this was always, going to be their way around it, and the chain of custody would be a total disaster.
And we were talking about chain of custody from day one. As soon as I was on the ground in Georgia with Patrick Witt and others, we were hammer and chain of custody. And
I showed him. Go ahead,
it
go ahead, I'll
was
tell
I
you.
mean, because for those that don't understand it, in the old days, the way you bought a vote is you would, they called it, and still happens, passing around money. So you would go to a Democratic precinct chairman, disproportionately in minority neighborhoods, but sometimes old blue collar rural neighborhoods too, usually through unions with union associations, and like in coal mining country, et cetera. And you'd hand out money. Like if you're in the Democratic primary, you basically had to buy some votes, right? If you're competing against somebody else. And Ed Rollins famously called it passing around money in New Jersey, no less. He got caught on tape, old Ed. But it's an old game and happens every single election. And I mean, like I tell people, if you want to know where a political machine is strong locally, look at where Bloomberg did well in the Democratic presidential primaries. Because Bloomberg had the most cash and he was buying every little political machine that still existed. Yep. Now, it couldn't buy off Jim Clyburn, who's about to get himself a Supreme Court justice. You talk about the ultimate payoff. Judge Childs is my prediction for the Supreme Court nominee. It's my bet that handing out here today. I think she's still at 3-1. I think she should be a 2-1 favorite, not a 3-1 underdog, because old Jim is waiting to cash some chips. As soon as I saw Lindsey Graham come out and say, "Oh, she would be a real good judge," I was like, "Wow,
Clyburn's already a chump."
Clyburn's already pulled old Lindsey aside and said, you're going to be a good boy, Lindsey. Make sure my people get through. You don't want me to cause trouble in your backyard in South Carolina." Of course, Lindsey Graham is in the United States Senate, thanks to Donald Trump's foolish premature endorsement of him in 2020.
Absolutely. We were just talking about that this morning with the gaggle. He did this to himself.
I mean,
Lindsey Graham.
Mind-numbing.
Let him burn. He had a good opponent.
Absolutely. And there were a bunch of people in South Carolina eager to burn him. And it was old Donald Trumpo that came in and saved old Lindsey Graham's career, for which he rewarded him.
And McConnell.
Which how did he reward him? He threw him under the bus come impeachment time, and he threw him under the bus come election time, come election contest time in the United States Senate. But that's why Childs is going to get it. Also, Obama still believes, probably rightfully, that Clyburn was key to his 2008 win. I mean, if anybody has any doubts about this, read what Bill Clinton did to Clyburn after that South Carolina primary. Called him up cussing and screaming and yelling. So Clinton attributed,
he believed it,
Obama's South Carolina win to Jim Clyburn, making sure the political machine in South Carolina held. But the way you hold as your local precinct chairman or a local activist, and you got, let's say in your precinct, 50, 100 votes, you give them $20 a pop. You say, here, you give them a card. You say, here's who you go in and vote for. Right. So you want to be on that card. Now, in the old days, pre-secret ballot days, the way you would do it is you would actually hand people the filled out ballot and, give them a bottle of whiskey or whatever. Say, all right, go on in there and vote. You don't even have to vote. You just put that ballot I already filled out for you in the ballot box. Sometimes it'd be by colors. Sometimes it'd be by animal symbols. Because remember, we had a lot of illiteracy or people who didn't speak the English language. So this was how a lot of the political machines worked. You got your ballot and they filled it out. Then you have the secret ballot where the state takes over the ballot, which was always going to lead to some trouble down the road. But one of the problems for the old political machines is now you had to make sure that idiot went in and voted the right way. And you had no guarantee they would, and you would never know if they did, other than the outcome not working to some percentage of people, but you don't know who. So the whole point of the secret ballot is it made fraud and bribery and intimidation harder to achieve. Difficult. Not impossible, but harder
but more
to
difficult.
achieve.
And just so, because I see people like, hey, you didn't answer about DeSantis. His name recognition is not, for one, we're not.
Oh, he's way behind Trump at this point. And Trump way behind Trump at this point. That doesn't mean DeSantis can't replace him if Trump continues to screw up on some areas.
But as of now,
Trump has started to pick up. He started to tune in by going to his rallies and realizing, man, every time I say, hey, vaccine, I get booed. And Trump's not used to ever getting booed. And at first he was trying to fight back when he was on the Bill O'Reilly tour, which I called, the sleeping pill.
That was a mistake, I think. That was a mistake.
I don't know why. I was like, if you want to make yourself look older, you couldn't make yourself look older than to go on the tour with Bill O'Reilly. I mean, come on. I mean, Tucker proved how much it was the power of the platform of Fox, not Bill O'Reilly's persuasive capabilities, that was key to that 8 o'clock slot, because his ratings have long jumped Bill O'Reilly's ratings.
Yep.
Bill O'Reilly was somebody that, your grandma down in the villages in Florida tuned into every night. He was not necessary viewing of young political activists, or
You see,
whereas
Tucker is
Tucker
crushing.
is.
Tucker is crushing the younger demographic. I attribute this 30 to 39 swing that we're seeing, an 18 to 24 swing. I'm telling you, Tucker is killing it with this demographic, and they are listening to him now more than they're listening to MSNBC. It's in the numbers, man. The proof's in the pudding.
Well, Glenn Greenwald put it out. I mean, 40, 45%. You have young Democrats who tune in.
These are Democrats watching
Which, by
Tucker.
the way, for those out there, but quickly, just to wrap up the fraud part, the problem with the fraud is you didn't know for sure that the ballot you gave the guy, that you paid him off to vote a certain way, would actually vote a certain way. How do you change that? Mail-in ballots. Because then you can fill in the ballot for him. I mean, you can fill in the ballot and have him sign it, and so then you still have you would get around the signature match problem, but you get to be there, and that's why we have all these strict mail-in ballot rules. Somebody in some states like Virginia, somebody else has to authenticate it, very strict signature match check to make sure that person actually signed the ballot, and that they were supposed to personally deliver it. So there's more control. There's not an intermediary to be that's easily interposed. All of getting rid of all those rules made it easy for the political machine to just fill out a person's ballot or double check. Let's see, make sure you mark it the right way.
And they gave him 2 months to do it, Robert. And they gave him 2 months to do it, as opposed to like election night or the day before. That's
and the fact they were scared of signature match checks made very clear how many of those they didn't even trust the guy to fill out the ballot. So they didn't trust Grandma. There's like, Grandma, I'll borrow your ballot. Don't worry, Grandma. You don't need to do anything. Or, as we saw and documented and detailed, it allowed people at nursing homes and or apartment buildings and public housing projects where you have centralized mail of ballots to just take those ballots, never interact with the voter, and fill it out and send it back in. And that's why you had unusual nursing home turnouts. You have nursing homes a couple of miles apart. One of them has traditional, which is low turnout, 50, 60%. And another one has like 95% turnout. You're like, how did that happen? It was because
Robert, when I had go ahead. Go ahead.
Whoever had access to the centralized storage of mail-in ballots was able to cast those ballots like one after the other. And as we saw with Arizona, sometimes they didn't even pretend they knew or could sign a fake name. They just put a straight line and send it in. And if you're in Michigan said, maybe that's a legitimate signature.
Uppercase, all this kind of crazy stuff.
Did
full caps.
Who did block print of a person's name? Who signs their name with block print?
and you're not even supposed to be allowed to. I mean, that's the point, but they just kind of let it, they let it go. Bottom line is, just to wrap up that other thing, people who are fans of Ron DeSantis should be happy. I'm not including him right now. His name recognition nationally is not good, and he would be down to Biden. That's the truth. I don't know that that's the case, a year from now. It's a long time in politics. I'm telling you right now, this is the way it is. And with that working class number, he ain't getting 61-22. That ain't happening, ladies and gentlemen.
He's still a governor of Florida. Half the country's not going to know him until if he were to actually be in the presidential primaries. That's when the country would get introduced to him.
Get to know him. Yes.
Get to know him. Now, in terms of forecasting that, at this point, DeSantis is not going to run against Trump unless Trump screws up. Now, Trump was
said it
screwing
explicitly,
up, but he's starting to. Yeah, exactly. And they're trying to make this big Trump versus DeSantis fight.
They are.
There isn't. There's some DeSantis political staffers that would like Trump undermined because they want to get in the White House quicker.
They don't want to wait another 4 years, bro.
Exactly. That's where that comes from. That comes from the climbing culture of DC, the political class. But the smart people around DeSantis know it makes no sense to challenge Trump. And it only makes sense to challenge Trump if Trump falls. Now, if Trump were to stay hooked on the vaccine message and he was off message on a lot of other topics and he continued to endorse the wrong people, then he would be slowly, steadily in trouble. But the only ones of us who are paying attention to that are his hardcore cadre. The ordinary person is paying no attention to that. They're not processing or absorbing that. Because it's just it's not, Trump says yay to vaccines is not a news story for 3 straight days. Just isn't.
Yep.
So it doesn't really saturate. So and Trump is benefiting right now from the fact that he's not in the focal point of the public limelight.
Totally agree.
So so his occasional screw ups, his occasional demeanor, dispositional issues that don't endear him to everyone. I mean, he's still very New York, and New York has never been popular personality-wise in the middle of the country. It can be popular for certain circumstances or situations, certain kinds of crises. But right now, the limelight is on Biden, and Biden's just a guy that was never going to do well under the limelight. And then you throw in the internal Democratic divisions, where the wokesters control cultural policy, but the neoliberals control economic policy and foreign policy. And the problem is the popular part of AOC is getting economic relief to working class people. The unpopular part of AOC is all the wokester nonsense and narcissism. Biden has borrowed the wokesterism and narcissism and abandoned things like student loan reform, things like minimum wage increase, and still embraced all the insanity of COVID policy.
Yeah, which I feel like they almost have nowhere else to go at this point.
I
haven't seen.
He would have to be a radical reversal and let Manchin run policy for the next year. Because then he'd get a bunch of stuff through the Senate. Then he'd get a bunch of stuff done. And Manchin is sensible. Manchin, is from an overwhelmingly Trump state in West Virginia.
Right.
Knows that and is aware of it.
That's not going to happen, Robert. That's not going to happen.
Biden's, and they can't even decide. I mean, like now trying to do the foreign policy nonsense, he's worse than Carter at trying to pull that off. Carter was good at the peace side of foreign policy, bad at the conflict side of the foreign policy. And instead of trying to embrace the peace side of Carter-style foreign policy, he's embraced the military debacle side. As you've detailed what happened in his, I'll take out an ISIS leader. Just like we took out bin Laden when I was with Obama. And look at Trump. It worked for Trump. I can one-up Trump. I'll take out an ISIS leader. How many women and children did he end up killing in that thing? Just like 13, the Afghanistan one.
13.
Where we got the wrong guy even.
Yeah, ISIS-K leader. It turned out we murdered a 6 and an 8-year-old and their parents, a couple other family members. But there's just no appetite. Here it is. There's no appetite for this action in Ukraine. And there's a lot of undecideds because people really just didn't know. He's not trying to sell it to them. So there were a lot of undecideds who were just, basically clueless that this man was trying to start an action against Russia, to defend Ukraine. It's only close with military advisors, but I'll tell you, that's because people don't know what that means. They really think that it's like calling them up and basically telling them what to do. Even on lethal aid, people were opposed. On humanitarian aid, Robert, that's it. Give them humanitarian aid if there's a problem, real humanitarian crisis. But, launching U.S. airstrikes against Russian targets, 26% think that's a good idea. 60% think it's a bad idea. I mean, it's also because
that 26% that thinks it's a good idea to bomb Russia. Those are the people we should be locking up.
Oh, they're out of their minds. I mean, look, I hate to tell you, but they're not the real. To get at, we don't have a whole lot of time to go into the minutia of Ukraine, but Russia is not the country that we need to balance against right now. NATO is obsolete.
Instead, we're pushing Russia into China's welcoming arms.
Yep.
Over this nonsense. But I mean, so he's got a little disaster. He tries to pull off another, look, I'm a badass, like he did in Afghanistan, that totally backfired. Backfires again. That ISIS story didn't last long because no one wanted to dig beneath the hood to see what actually happened. So that was like one day story, even from the media. And the Ukraine stuff is obvious gibberish. I get Boris Johnson. He's trying to find any distraction to keep him from getting kicked to the curb because of his idiotic handling of the COVID policy. In the UK. So I get him trying to pretend that the British Empire is still back by, running around playing boss, which is going to go nowhere. Instead, it's going to help Macron in his re-election bids by saying, look, I'm the great French diplomat, by solving a problem that doesn't really exist. At least not at the scale and scope the Western press is trying to pretend. Russia has no interest in invading Ukraine. Russia's only interest is no NATO being in Ukraine, and the Ukraine just keeping its words. What's amazing is the institutional media's ability to not mention the words Minsk Accords. And I mean, here we have an international agreement that Ukraine agreed to agree with the rebels in the eastern part of Ukraine, saying, here's how we're going to resolve this going forward. Here's what we agreed to. The Minsk Accords were agreed to by Ukraine, agreed to by the rebels in that part of the region, agreed to by the European powers, agreed to by the United Nations, including the United States. And yet the words Minsk Accords don't come out of the media's vocabulary when discussing this dispute. It's like we already have a means of resolution. We
Right.
already, all the meaningful parties agreed to it. Let's just enforce the Minsk Accords. But they don't want to because you have all the Western cronies who, and the grifters who are making all that money off of Ukraine, including obviously quite famously Hunter Biden and the Biden family.
Biden's. Yeah.
And then you have the deep state looking for an excuse with a conflict with Russia. And then you have Biden desperate to change any story in the hopes that it will temporarily boost his polling numbers. None of it's going to work.
Yeah, and people were concerned about domestic issues. They were like, Ukraine, what the hell are you asking me about this for? I have food shortages. More than 50% said I keep going back to this number, but it's that important. More than 50%, 52 roughly, said that they have, yes, significant price increases with meat and poultry. The vast majority are saying there's shortages all over the place. We asked about meat and poultry, fruits and vegetables, paper products, canned goods, all down the line. Milk, eggs, bread. I mean, milk and dairy, eggs, bread. It was unbelievable, the numbers. The election is about domestic affairs right now. And that's it. By the way, look who's up on Rumble right now. Look who's on Rumble. It's your favorite Monday show. What are the odds? Yeah, so with that, Robert, I mean, it's just lastly, I wanted to mention when you brought up Patrick Witt, when we had him on the show, because of how they did that in Georgia and basically unsolicited sent out all those ballots. I pulled up and showed him how on the voter file, how many ballots just in his district alone went from inactive to active status, and what the ages are for some of these people and where their current state of residences are. They're gone, man. They're movers. They're people who have left the 10th district, and they're also 105 and above. There was 48 people who was like 116 or something. I kid you not. I was like, this is ridiculous. But he's right, because he knows, doing the work he did down there with you and calling me and us all trying to figure out what the hell happened. That decision to send those ballots out unsolicited, basically, and then giving the opportunity for these third-party ballot traffickers, it reactivated records that never should have been reactivated. So the number that, people have come up with, Brainerd was pretty close as well, but Patrick Witt did his own, we did ours, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 80,000 ballots that were inactive for years, never should have gone out, recent, because we were looking for the low-hanging fruit. I don't know, it could be more, but I was looking for the low-hanging fruit with a limited budget. So I went after change of address and most suspected deceased. And the deceased is obviously by birthday, ladies and gentlemen. First name, last name, middle initial, birthday, address. We know who they are. This idea like, oh, that's so-and-so's cousin. No, it's not. And then not to mention, you could pick up the phone and call the record. And if they're movers, it's a landline. You're going to get a disconnect. You call them on the cell phone. Chances are you're going to catch them in the somewhere else, and they'll tell you, "I'm not here anymore." So, I mean, this was just that small little, semi-rural district, and there were all these records.
Well, I mean, you had the Deputy Secretary of State that was a Trump hater saying there's no election problems, discovered that there are people illegally voting from his house, claiming his address as their address. So, I mean, it was an embarrassing failure what took place in the election context. So, I mean, long and short of it, I don't see Democrats being able to. There is a path for Democrats, for Biden to bounce back, but it's not a path he's willing to take. The deep state's not interested in it. Someone asked who's really running They're running the show.
That's where I'm
Biden is the figurehead. Harris is not running anything because she's deeply unpopular. Can't keep her own staff happy without them leaking to Politico. She's. I tell people she's one of the dumbest. I mean, when Iowa rejected her so bad she had to drop out before the race even got going meaningfully. She's not. She was a terrible, terrible choice. And now they're in trouble for it. Tulsi Gabbard keeps ragging Biden about it, saying, "Hey, when's the last time you picked someone based on race and gender? How did that turn out?" But that's what he is going to do for the Supreme Court. And Childs reflects the balance. It reflects the Democratic political machine still dominates. It reflects she's a neoliberal. I mean, the first thing she does as a black female law graduate is go work for a corporate law firm, screwing over other black employees and women employees. Right. That's who she is. But she tried to liberalize election law in South Carolina. Supreme Court overturned it, but she's shown her loyalty on that issue. She supported vaccine mandates that a private employer imposed. So she's shown her loyalty on that issue. So she's the kind of neoliberal figurehead of someone that's a corporate neoliberal at heart, but has the right color of skin and the right gender for the current Biden-esque Democratic Party, which is a neoliberal, corporate liberal, but wokester governance. And the problem is that's the worst of both worlds. It loses its working class base on economic policy, loses its young voters on the policies they're enthusiastic about, while antagonizing some of their older and middle-aged working class ethnic voters who have no interest in the wokesterism. That's why they're in the trouble they're in, and it would require a complete 180 course reversal, which almost nobody in the Biden administration has the capacity or capability to deliver, and which institutional interest within the because what it is, you have a bunch of parts of the power structure competing for power on a given day.
That's right.
Because who knows what Joe Biden is going to do, and because Joe Biden's not meaningfully, functionally in control on a deal. That's why you see competing policy you see it worse in foreign policy, where one day it's this way on Ukraine, the other day it's the next day, then it's the next, and it's a flip and back and forth, and you're going to
because he's not there, Robert. Because normally you have these warring factions in the White House who compete for the ear of the president, but you're competing for an empty head. It's attached.
Yes.
The ear is attached to an empty head. We are experiencing like a Roosevelt had polio level kind of conspiracy with the media and not telling us about Joe Biden. Did you hear Emerald after she left? She went on War Room and explained what Secret Service officers had been telling her about it. The man is meandering the halls of the residence at night. He doesn't know which one's my room. I mean, Robert, this is bad, man. I mean, and you know it's true because it's reflective in what you're saying.
20 bad, but it's almost to that level. For those who don't remember, Woodrow Wilson was basically dead, and his wife was running the country.
And his wife, It's so true, though. It's true, man. Last, I guess we could button it up, but last thing, tell people where they can follow you, Robert. Also, what's your last pick? I was gonna say I'm with you on where the outlook for the next year. Yes, they're doing great on redistricting. I just think that there are districts that are not safe that they think are decently safe districts. When people tweet me about the Cook Politico report, I tell them, remember, they said Republicans would lose 15 seats last election. There were districts they just never saw coming because they're not keeping up with the ethnicity, the coalition shift for ethnic groups. You're just not seeing it. And if whites move back just a little bit more than they think is going to happen, it's a freaking wipeout. All across these districts, they don't think the scene coming. Now, I would say maintain your standards because Democrats aren't exposed like they were in 2010, right? Like they won districts in 2008 when Obama won. They never should have won. And it was easy for Republicans to run up to 60. Honestly, it kind of was. But still, Republicans aren't that far from the majority. So you're talking about a handful of districts here, folks. We have Republicans up by 6 or 7 on the generic ballot right now. Robert, you've been following me a long time. I've never had a Republican lead in generic ballot like that. R+3, man. R+3.
And translated because of the advantage of where Republican seats are located, winning by 6 or 7 can translate into a bigger edge in the House.
Yeah.
Because of the distribution of seats, and particularly, basically, that you have more 80% Democrat seats than you have 80% Republican seats. So many of those in the middle. If Republicans are winning 7 points nationwide, it's like a 10-point win in terms of how it actually translates into House seats. So, so I gave out the bet on the book for those people that asked is Reagan by our friend Larry Schweikert. Which is a good biography on Reagan. Has a lot of packed information in it, which and is
first
useful
one to have free reign of the library.
Yeah,
first one.
Exactly. That's right. So it's a good fun book. The prediction I have right out there right now is that on Judge Childs, I gave her out when she was at 24% on PredictIt, better than 3-to-1 odds in various betting markets, including PredictIt. And the way you can bet on that is you can bet yes on Judge Childs and no on the others. And so then you could aggregate and make as much as, you had 3-to-1 on your money, and you could bet as much as, 2,400 or so. I think 850 is the max per bet. But the so that and I would bet Childs all the way up to even money because I think she should be a 2-1 favorite because especially with the United States Senator from New Mexico having a stroke not long after he took a certain shot. Democrats are short.
I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm just laughing because it's kind of ironic.
Oh, no doubt. So right now their problem is Kamala Harris, even if she could be a deciding vote, which is legally in dispute thanks to Lawrence Tribe wanting to attack Pence. They have to have at least one Republican vote if they hold court in the Democratic side. And Lindsey Graham's already said he'll vote for Childs. So you combine that with Jim Clyburn being the key backer and a lot of people who owe debt to him, including both Obama and Biden factions, it's almost a guarantee that she will be on the U.S. Supreme Court, is my view. So that's where I put her as a 2-1 favorite rather than a 3-1 underdog. Currently, I would say right now, the odds are still slightly understate the degree to which I believe Republicans will win the governorships of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, keep Texas, keep Florida, keep Georgia, keep Arizona. So and I think above average odds that Adam Laxalt wins the Senate in Nevada, and that the governorship flips in Nevada because of what we've been talking about, working class Mexican American men. That they're the vote that's shifting massively at a rapid speed. A real realignment that was, glimpsed at in 2020, when Zapata, those kind of counties named after Mexican revolutionaries are voting for Trump. That was a sign that things are going different. I think DeSantis is safer. The polls will always be tight in Florida because it's always tight in Florida. But the polls are actually showing him with unusual leads for Florida gubernatorial.
Ridiculous.
When you're up by 6 to 10 points, normally that's just unheard of in a competitive Florida race. So I think he's safe and a good bet. I think right now it will be they will pick up +3 seats in the Senate. The Senate will go back Republican. They'll get those key governorships, which will matter for 2024 in terms of how the election fortification doesn't happen again. There's already been good legislative reforms, but winning back the governorships would be key. And lower state offices like Attorney General and Secretary of State, where those are on the ballot. Otherwise, the governor usually gets to pick them. And then in the House, I think Republicans are the only reason why it might not be bigger than 2010 is that their Democrats have fewer seats.
That's
so
right.
in terms of
That's
real
my point.
volume, but I think the Republican edge that may come out of it, I think what we're going to see is something that looked like the 1920s. Where you had the biggest number of not only big Republican edges, but you also had the most populist on the Republican side that the Republican Party ever had back in the 1920s. I think you're also going to see that, where you're going to go from 1 or 2 sporadically populist voices in the Senate and 3 or 5 populist Republican voices in the House to 30 to 50 Republican populist voices in the House and 4 to 6 Republican populist voices in the Senate. And the most examples would be Laxalt from Nevada, J.D. Vance from Ohio, Greitens from Missouri, Blake Masters from Arizona, and I think 1 or 2 other seats that will surprise some people, whether it's who comes out of the North Carolina primaries, maybe a surprise out of the Pennsylvania primaries, the Alaska primaries. I think you're going to add to, right now, Cruz is occasionally populist, Hawley's occasionally populist, Rand Paul is occasionally populist, but you only have a few voices on the Senate side that are consistently populist. And then on the House, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Madison Cawthorn. Is it Cawthorn or am I mispronouncing his last name?
Cawthorn. Yeah, Cawthorn.
Yeah, it is Cawthorn.
Yeah.
Cawthorn, a few others, Paul Gosar, occasionally Jim Jordan, occasionally Chip Roy. But I think you're going to have a lot more of Matt Gaetz style people in the House come 2020.
You're going to have
and that's going to help Trump.
He's going to win. Joe Kent's going to win.
If Trump comes back, he'll be a much more populist version. Right now, I would say Trump is the heavy favorite to win the Republican primary, particularly if he corrects some of his path. He still needs to correct his advisory path. But the best way to correct his advisory path is get a lot of populists elected to state legislatures, governorships, House, and Senate. That is what will keep Trump disciplined.
He needs an infrastructure, period.
And it has to be given to him because he will not create it himself because, frankly, he doesn't have the skill set to do so. He's proven that at this point.
Yeah, he needs it. Otherwise, it will just be a repeat, Robert, and it would be,
Right.
frankly, pointless. I mean, that's just, but yeah, you have people like Joe Kent in the House instead of or Butler, and down the line.
The Wyoming, I mean, Cheney will be gone. Kinzinger's already admitted he's gone. A lot of those old establishment types will all be gone. And the Senate will be a little tricky. Another prediction, Mitch McConnell will retire in 2023 because Kentucky, a Republican governor, is going to win, in my view, in 2022. That Democrat barely won last time. And as soon as that happens, the Republican governor, McConnell, will announce his resignation so that the Attorney General from Kentucky, Daniel Cameron, will be put into the U.S. Senate. And McConnell will not be a factor come 2023. Now, problem is his potential replacements in the Senate are barely marginal improvements over him right now.
That's right. And if that, John Thune,
Thune is just as bad. Thune wanted to impeach Trump.
Just as bad. Yeah, that's right. He is a nightmare. He is one of the biggest two-faced dirtbags in the United States Senate. I'm sorry. I'm not even pulling punches anyway. I don't care. I don't like these people. You know why? Because I'm so sick of them going on Fox News and pretending to be somebody else and then listening to them talk to donors and just laugh behind your back. And I don't know why there are so many people who think it's like incumbent on them to just stay silent. I just don't get it. I just don't get this anymore. Lindsey Graham, I told you all he was a two-faced swine. I told you. I heard you. I'm not gonna get it. I'm not gonna get into it again. The man is like 1 minute, like a commenter said, and Laura was like, remember Hannity? All those pleading for money. I'm going to lose. I love Donald Trump. I love him. I need your help. And then 24 hours later, sitting in a friend's living room, telling him the best thing for the Republican Party is for Donald Trump to lose because by the way, the argument wasn't even true, which was that he's going to stain us and hurt us with minorities for a generation. And they're the growing voting bloc while whites are shrinking. He got the most non-white votes since Richard Nixon. So I don't know if that for a Republican. So his argument wasn't even right, which tells you, considering he's continuing, it tells you that wasn't really his argument. His argument is he's a dirtbag who pledges his allegiance to the military-industrial complex, and he's never going to be what he purports to be every time he gets a hit on Fox News. So he's not that guy. John Thune, another one. He was supposed to be the conservative challenger to the Democratic leader. Remember? That's where John Thune came from. And he turned out to be no better.
Especially Republicans from South Dakota. The Dakotas, those places, they should be populist. I mean,
absolutely.
That's a very populist.
That's the birth of it.
Long history of populist Republicans. Senator Nye. You can go back to some of the great ones. The guys that used to do the War Commission and talk about the war profiteers and the Wall Street rapers and all the rest. I mean, that was that part of the party. Used to, Idaho, Wyoming, all of that. And instead you end up with the Thunes and the Cheneys and the Grahams. South Carolina's had a populist history of its own course. I mean, you remember the famous Democratic senator from there who got so mad about the Japanese trade war and some of the Japanese comments that he sent a fax to the Japanese ambassador of showing the last thing to be exported from the United States to Japan. And it was a picture of the nuclear bomb.
Right.
That used to be old school popular.
The golden era, man, of populism.
Lindsey Graham is like a poor man's country clubber.
That is what he is, man. He's like that. Like he's like a wannabe to the Horry County sweater vest. That is what he is. And it's never going to change, Robert. He's never
the living embodiment of a cuckold.
Oh, man. Without a doubt. I don't know why I never thought of that. That is so painfully obvious. I'm mad at myself for not thinking that. I got to tell you. All right. Well, with that, man, tell people where they can find you.
Absolutely. For exclusive content, including a bunch of court cases, other commentary we can't get into on YouTube about things related to the vaccine and mask mandates and the science and medicine or evidence or lack thereof. You can find all that at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
As always, my friend, it's good to be back. Looking forward to more, and we'll talk real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
That was Robert Barnes, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I'm going to go. We're going to go. That was a nice little kickoff. Remember, What Are the Odds will be the first Monday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Of course, I'm going to remind you. And then when we get closer to the election, it will be monthly. All right. So just keep that in mind. Next time, for those who are wanting it to stream directly to locals, next time we'll have that. All right. It was kind of like a little glitchy. I didn't want to take the risk and then have you guys sitting there. So I did that. But don't forget, subscribe to Rumble. If you guys are watching on YouTube, there were a lot of you. We love you for it, of course. Give us a like, hit the notification bell after you subscribe. That will let you know when we're going to go live. But of course, we are imploring you to go on over and sign up at Rumble. If you're watching on Rumble, right there up on the top above the screen, you'll see the locals community. Go ahead and sign up to peoplespundit.locals.com. That's ours. And then, of course, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But you can get right to locals from that button right up top. All right, guys, I'm out. Here's Highway. Thanks for watching. I'm glad you guys came to watch What Are the Odds again. We'll be back. See you soon.
The lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway, restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working